Welcome to the Business SOS podcast. This is episode 75 of Business SOS. This is Rich Sierra, president of the Florida Small Business Legal Center. As we continue getting close to episode 100, I'm very excited about this. Before we begin, I want to thank Angela Neve for being the guest host the last two episodes. It was a lot of fun to have her interview me on my book, Business SOS, 8 Common Legal Mistakes Business Owners Make and How to Avoid Them, which is available on Amazon, Barnes & Noble. You can ask for your local bookstores. So it was very cool to have her interview me, and actually it was different for me since I was not used to being on the other side, so in the hot seat, so to speak. It was a lot of fun, and I really thank you, and I appreciate Angela for doing that, and I look forward to having her again. This time I'll be the one doing the interviewing. So thank you, Angela. As you know, in the last few episodes, I've gone over the theme of the 10 tips or 10 common mistakes. So I wanted to continue with that theme today. And I want to start with a story. I talked to a client just a few weeks ago that owns a landscaping company. And the client has a number of accounts throughout South Florida. And the client reached out to me and say, listen, I have a number of accounts that one particular account that owes the client over $600,000. And the client is not paying. And I said, well, first, how did that get to that point? What happened throughout the communication or the relationship that you're providing services while the receivables escalate to that high amount? And it was simply delays on providing the payment, but also partial payments that they were made along the way, and they continue doing the work, and it just continues to creep up. And to the point that the client said, you know what, I'm done. I cannot continue doing this, and I cannot continue providing services while I'm not getting paid, and basically having to pay employees, having to purchase material and provide services to the properties that this particular client has. And, at one point the client said enough is enough. And all the informal collection efforts failed, and the client is out this money, and the client provided services, and the client is entitled to receive these funds. So that's where the client reached out to me. What should I do? And there are a number of options here. Today's topic will be 10 tips to improve your collections in your business. So in terms of the options, obviously, anything you can do to collect any funds from the clients that is owed to you is better than litigation or pursuing any type of legal action. It's just less costly because the money's already, you provided services, the money's already out. So you want to try to mitigate and try to get any money you can through informal channels versus formal channels, simply because it's less expensive, and you'll have some money coming back to you. As I tell my clients, just because you have a number and a piece of paper and an invoice, it doesn't do you any good unless it's actually converted in some type of cash that you can apply to your business. So we've heard the adage, cash is king. I like to think sales is king and cash is queen, because if you don't have sales, you don't have cash. So, but we have heard of that, and the reality is that cash flow is extremely important in your business. And I want to talk to you about that today, simply because a lot of problems that arise in terms of contract disputes, partnership disputes, stem from the lack of cash flow in that business. So you improve your cash flow, you improve your business. And a way to improve your cash flow is improving your collections. So we'll talk about that today. And, poor collection practices can lead to increased debt, strained relationship with your vendors if vendors are not getting paid, and ultimately can cause the failure of your business. So it goes without saying, you have to protect your cash flow. So let's talk about the 10 tips that I want to share with you today. The tip number one is set clear payment terms right from the very beginning. If you provide a service business, and this particular client provides a service business, landscaping to various condominiums and apartments throughout South Florida, and working with property management companies, you want to have a contract, a clear contract that sets clear payment terms right from the very beginning, how you're going to get paid, when you're going to get paid, what is the process of providing the invoice or the purchase order or the approval process for that invoice is very important. And you have to have that clearly set up in the contract. Obviously, any deadlines have to be included there. How are you going to get paid? Acceptable forms of payment, whether it's going to be via automatic credit card, ACH, or wire transfer. And what penalties will the client have if you're not getting paid? So that's very important to have as well. Tip number 2, you got to invoice promptly and accurately. Some of the clients that I talk to, sometimes they forget to send invoices. The invoices are just not accurate. They're not clearly laid out. So you got to be disciplined about sending your invoice, whether it's in a weekly basis, bi-weekly basis, or monthly basis. You got to send them out. You know, your client is not going to know how much money is owed to you if you don't send that invoice. And that invoice is very important, becomes a legal document when it's sent. So it is important for you to send it, and also, you know, that it's accurately, that it's an accurate invoice. I'll say send the invoice immediately after the service is rendered. You can also have pre-authorized credit card. If there's something that is a recurrent service, you can also have some pre-authorized service that you send the invoice. If they don't say anything, they don't tell you there's an issue here with the invoice within 3 days, then you're authorized to draw the bank account or the credit card that they provide to you. So there are different methods that you can collect, but the objective is for you to collect fast on that invoice. Depending on the type of service you provide, you can ask for an advance deposit on the services. And also for products, you certainly want to get advance payment. You don't want to send the product out and then have to wait to get paid. So depending on the relationship you have with this client, you have to figure that out. But, you know, obviously anything that you're waiting for payment, there's always a risk that you may not get paid. Already discussed this. Ensure that invoices are accurate and easy to read. The due date, services rendered, and payment instructions. Tip number 3, offer multiple payment methods. Make it easy for the client to pay you. Let's not make it difficult. You can accept credit cards, ACH transfers, Zelle, PayPal, Venmo. If you're going to accept credit cards, you need to understand that there's always a risk of a potential chargeback. And when you accept credit cards, in the terms of conditions of your merchant services that most of us don't read, that is a long document, but the reality is you accept the dispute resolution process of that merchant service. So you have to understand that there's a potential chargeback there. Understand that you have agreed with that credit card company that you will be using their dispute resolution process as to how that's going to be resolved. My recommendation is that within your invoice, have it very clear that a credit card payment is due is non-refundable and earned upon receipt. So that way there's no doubt that in the case that there's a dispute as to that invoice, you already have some documentation that the client agreed that the services have been rendered and you have earned those fees, and there's no dispute later on. Because we're dealing with chargebacks, what happens is that the bank automatically takes the money out. The merchant takes the money out of the account until the matter gets resolved. So, if you have too many of these, then the merchant may not approve you for further transactions or hold back a certain percentage depending on the risk. They said, okay, we're going to allow these charges to go through, but we're going to hold back 10% of whatever you collected, and we're going to give it to you back in 60 days for potential future chargebacks. So you have to make sure that you don't get that many chargebacks. And if you have too many, you got to be concerned that you might have a situation that, the merchant might put a limit on how many transactions you can actually process through this merchant, or the merchant can withhold money and then release it later on, or worse, the merchant decide not to provide services anymore. To play it safe, I always recommend my clients to have more than one merchant and more than one payment method, simply because things can happen, and you're in a situation that one merchant is, for whatever reason, giving you a hard time. You need to be able to immediately pivot to another merchant that you can continue providing services, continue collecting money while you're resolving the issue with merchant number one. So you have to understand, have multiple entries of payment method. Not only is good for your customers, but also is good for you, that you're not relying exclusively on one. And that's really more of a business strategy for you to consider. Tip number 4, implement a payment reminder system. Nowadays, there's really no excuse not having one. I mean, you have QuickBooks, you have FreshBooks, you have a number of online cloud-based accounting systems which automatically send invoices. PayPal automatically sends them as well. So there's not only a reminder system for you about when those invoices are due, but also a reminder system to the customer that when the invoice is due. And I will not wait until the payment is past due to send a reminder. You can start sending a reminder during 15 days, 10 days, 5 days, friendly reminder just to let you know this invoice is due. So the more you do that, the more likely you're going to get paid. Again, it's about reducing the probabilities or the likelihood of you not getting paid on time. Tip number 5, I would offer to incentivize early payments. Depending on the type of business you're in, if they pay, say, within 10 days or 5 days, you can offer a 2% discount on the invoice just to give them an incentive to pay you early. Again, that's really more of a business strategy. Those are tips, but that's something, depending on the type of business you're in, you might want to consider that as well. Tip number 6, and this one should have been higher in my list, and it goes without saying that you have to build strong relationship with your clients in order to reduce the likelihood of not getting paid on time. The clients will pay you if they feel that the relationship has value. There's a more likelihood that they will pay you on time if they value your relationship. I want to kind of rephrase that. And also the relationship we have with your clients is important for 2 reasons. You're providing service, but at the same time, if there are any issues that regarding that the client might have a slow period of cash flow or collections because working with the clients that also pretty much do the same thing, or they have a situation where they might not be able to pay that payment on time, by having that relationship with your client, that trust, the client is more likely to open up and tell you, listen, there's something going on here. I want to talk to you about this, okay? And you'd rather know that before the payment is due rather than the payment is past due, okay? You don't want to wait for, until it's past due to see what's going on. But if a client tells you that they might not be able to make the full payment, you might be able to negotiate, listen, can we restructure this particular invoice into various payments so you get paid? So, and I've done that with my clients sometimes. A specific invoice that's maybe a little bit too high. I'd rather be told, 2 weeks before it's due that, listen, I'm not sure if I'm going to be able to make this particular payment, but what I can do is pay you a portion of it now, and then can we break that down in a few payments? So communication is key with your clients, and building that strong relationship will allow you to mitigate that shortfall of cash flow that you were expecting from that payment. Another tip that I will give you is that, which I do in my cases, in my practice, I try not to make the invoices due at the end of the month. It's just, all the bills, for the most, whatever reason, they're due at the end of the month. You have your mortgage payment, your car payment, the beginning of the month. So at that period between the 30th of the month and the 2nd of the month, everybody's paying bills. So what happens is this, that people will prioritize those invoices. They'll prioritize them, and then they'll decide which ones to pay, which ones not to pay, depending on how much money they have. So make the due date a little bit off. Just do it on the 10th or the 20th. Okay, so that way you're not competing with other invoices that are also on that list of that client to pay out. The client might have payroll as well. So just be a little more creative as to when your invoices due, and also your invoices will stand out, and maybe that one will get paid. So working that, be a little more creative about when the invoices are due. That's something you can work out. There's no rule that says you have to pay, you have to have your invoices due by the end of the month, just any day. But also know that the end of the month, the beginning of the month, very likely, that's going to be hold. Tip number 6. Yes. Now talk about tip number 6. Build strong relationship with your clients that are more likely to pay. If they value relationship with you, we went over that one. So let's go to tip number 7. Monitor accounts receivables weekly. That's very important. In your business, if you have accounts receivables, you got to monitor them weekly, and making sure that they don't get stale. The longer an accounts receivable becomes stale, the less likely you're going to get paid. And that's the reality, or you're going to get paid less. So what I recommend in this case is don't let this get past 60 days. And if there's an issue that somebody's in the 60-day mark, you got to make that phone call and say, what's going on here? Clearly, you should have a phone call the 30th day, and the 45th day, and the 60th day with that particular client, and making sure that not continue providing services. That's very, very important. And one of the things that, going back to that client that I referred to earlier, that the client continued providing services throughout the process, and while the accounts receivable were escalating and they were getting partial payments. So at a certain point, you cannot continue providing services. What's going to happen is that you as the client are financing that business. You're financing your client. You're lending the client money by providing services you're not getting paid for. So you have to somehow, at a certain point, you got to draw the line and say, I'm not going to continue providing services. This is the end. And then it goes into a collections issue. So we try the informal channels first. We try to communicate and try to negotiate a payment schedule. But if that fails, then we need to go in a more formal process, which I'll go over that in a few minutes. And going back to accounts receivables, one of the things you want to keep track of that is because you want to identify clients that may have a potential payment collections issue. You want to make sure that you identify that sooner and have this conversation sooner and have a creative approach on how to handle it. Remember that what you want to do is collect that money. You don't want to have it stay there and have a large accounts receivable, because that's going to devastate your business. Money you will not be able to use for payroll. You're not going to be able to use for your employees. You're not going to be able to pay yourself. So there's an impact to your business when you have receivables that are not paid. Tip number 8, charge late fees. If there's a situation, and there's something that I recommend that includes in your contract, but also on your invoices as well. You can put at the bottom that there's a late fee of 1.5% per month, or maximum allowable by law. In Florida, it's 18%. But when you send a second invoice with a late fee, it just basically tells the client, listen, you're not going to pay on my terms, then you got to pay a late fee. Of course, you can negotiate that later if you want. Listen, if you pay this invoice now, by Friday, I'll remove the late fees. You can negotiate that, but you're entitled to that. Especially if it goes to a legal process of collections, you're entitled to collect that late fee if it's in the contract and if it's in your invoices, on your invoices. Tip number 9, This one, is kind of a combination of both. Use a collection agency or an attorney if necessary. So we'll talk about litigation in a few minutes, and because as you know, that's what I do. I do business litigation and contract law, and this should be the last resort. When you bring a collection agency in, the collection agency will take a percentage of whatever amount you're trying to collect. They work primarily on a contingency basis. And so at that point, the relationship with that client has pretty much is gone. It's very unlikely that you will be working with that client if the client is you have sent a client to a collection agency. So you have to make that determination if you have exhausted all the efforts, informal efforts, and try to collect on that money, then that might be the last resort, knowing very well that you're not going to collect 100% of whatever you're owed, but you might be able to collect something. The other alternative is also hiring an attorney to collect. And there are attorneys that specialize in debt collection. I only do collections for commercial clients. I don't do consumer collections. That's a whole different area that some attorneys specialize in. But for business clients, I do collections as well. Excuse me. The decision to sue someone for unpaid, unpaid bills or services rendered is an important one. What's going to happen in this case is that you're going to be expending additional fees to collect on that receivable. And it all depends. If it's something in the less than $8,000 range, you have small claims court. It's a relatively simple procedure. You do not need an attorney to do that. And I think in a few episodes back, I actually featured the self-help section of the Palm Beach County Clerk. They have a very good self-help section, and it's very simple. And I'm referring to Palm Beach, but there are pretty much every jurisdiction in Florida, every clerk in Florida has a section for self-help, and they give you the small claims forms. You can download them there. And if you're a business, you're a corporation, you do not need an attorney to file a lawsuit in small claims. You can do that yourself. That's the only exception. If you are anything above county court, anything over $8,000 and above, you need an attorney to file a lawsuit to collect on that. So at that point, you're expending funds on that attorney to file that lawsuit for you. Usually we preface, before we file the lawsuit, sometimes we send a demand letter. I like to send my demand letters with a draft of the lawsuit unfiled. That's just my style. In some cases, that's what I do, simply because I want to send a message to the other side that my client is entitled to collect on these fees, and if we are unable to resolve it amicably, the only option that we have is to file the lawsuit. And by them seeing the lawsuit drafted, informed that all we have to do is sign it and file it, it provides an incentive for that business owner to perhaps hire an attorney, which will be my preference, and then that attorney will call me and we can begin to negotiate a potential settlement. Could be a discounted rate for that particular invoice. It could be a potential payment plan. But the goal is to communicate. The goal is to have an open line of communication between my client side, which I'm representing, and also the attorney side on the defendant side in this case, which at that point will be the debtor that we're trying to collect from. And what happens, you have to make a determination, how much money am I trying to collect? What's going to be my cost of collecting this debt? What defenses they may raise? And because for every breach of contract claim, there are defenses. So those things, those services, those decisions, and those conversations have to take place. And the way I look at it is that, if you have something in the $20,000 range, it might be worth discussing it about whether or not to file a lawsuit. If you're talking something in the $2,000 range, you might want to decide whether that's something you want to write off, because it's going to cost you more than $2,000 to pursue the lawsuit. Small claims is a little different. You can do that yourself. Obviously, we can guide you on that if necessary, but it's certainly not worth retaining counsel for a $2,000 bill. But that's my personal opinion. It's not an advice. Now, another thing that I want to, caveat here, another that I forgot to mention, is that when you have your contracts, it is very important in your contracts and your invoices to include that in the event that you have to go to collections, in the event that you have to pursue the matter in collections or file a lawsuit in court to collect on money that is owed to you, you are entitled to receive, they agreed that you will be entitled to collect attorney's fees and costs incurred in enforcing the invoice, enforcing the contract. If you do not have there, you end up incurring those costs. In Florida, two ways you can collect attorney's fees on a contract. If it's listed in the contract, or you're pursuing a statutory claim. That's the only two ways. There are other ways that we can do it through some motions with the court, but that's really not applicable in this case, unless you're in litigation and we kind of know the various rules. But generally speaking, if it's not in the contract, very likely you'll have to pay those fees. So if you have a $20,000 bill, it's going to cost you another $5,000 to initiate that lawsuit and begin the process. And they put defenses, that $20,000 begins to erode in legal fees. So you have to make that decision, and that's not an easy one. And that can only be done through a consultation with an attorney that can help you weigh the pros and cons in pursuing that as well. And in some cases, it is worth pursuing. In some cases, it is not. Every case is different, but you have to make that determination when you speak with your attorney. Tip number 10, know when to write off bad debts or negotiate a discount. I mean, at some point, the debts, you might have to write them off because it'll cost you more than to pursue that debt than it's worth it, or the debt is very stale, or the people that you were in doing business with are no longer there, or the business is closed. There are so many reasons why it might not be worth pursuing that debt. So you have to make a determination. You talk to your accountant about what is the process of writing the debt off, and then the accountant can tell you that. Another thing that I would recommend before filing the lawsuit as well, if you basically exhausted all the remedies, is negotiate a substantial discount. I'm sure it's not going to be your preference. I'm certain that if you have somebody owes you, $10,000, you're not going to say, okay, give me $3,000. We'll call this, we'll just walk away from this. It's difficult to do that, and I'm not recommending you do. But at the same time, when you have a $10,000 invoice nobody has paid, that very unlikely is going to get paid for whatever reason. Okay, if you're able to provide an incentive to that person to give you something for that invoice, write the rest off, you have to consider that as well, because that extra money coming your way is better than having that invoice unpaid. And that is really more of a personal decision. But at this point, you're mitigating damages. It's already lost. You're not going to get paid on that unless something dramatic happens. And it's going to cost you a significant amount of money to pursue that invoice in the first place. So at some point, you make a business decision and say, okay, you know what? Let me see if I can negotiate something here. Because why pay a collection agency 40%? Maybe knock off 40% of that bill. Again, it's about a strategy to try to collect something versus nothing. But that's a decision that you have to make. Just to recap some of the tips that we talked about before. Tip number 1, set clear payment terms right from the very beginning. Invoice promptly and accurately. That's tip number 2. Tip number 3, offer multiple payment methods. Tip number 4, implement a payment reminder system. You can do that through software. At this point, it's really everybody should have QuickBooks or FreshBooks, or hopefully you're not keeping track of your finances manually. It's just not practical to do that. Incentivize early payments. Building strong client relationships is very important to keeping those receivables at a minimum. And I will also say to you, do not keep those receivables at a very, very short period. Do not allow a client to go in a long period of time without paying you while you're providing services, simply because it could devastate your business, especially your small business. One client that you're depending on decides not to pay you, it could be a problem. Monitor accounts receivables weekly. Charge late fees. That's number 8. Number 9, use a collection agency or attorney if necessary. That is the last resort. And number 10, know when to write off the bad debts or negotiate a substantial discount just to get paid and collect something on that invoice. And then, of course, you won't do business with that client again. I think that's good for today for episode 75, Business SOS. And how can you reach me? You can send me an email at rich@richsierra.com. If you have a legal question you'd like me to answer for you, send that email. If I select your question, I'll send you a free copy of my book, Business SOS, 8 Common Legal Mistakes Business Owners Make and How to Avoid Them. It's available on Amazon, Barnes & Noble. You can ask for your local bookstores as well. If you're interested in my legal services, my website is FloridaSmallBusinessLegalCenter.com. We're on Facebook at FSB Legal. If you'd like to watch the video of this podcast, we're youtube.com/@RichardSierra. We're on Instagram at FSB Legal. You can call me at 866-842-5202. If you like the podcast, we're on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, wherever you enjoy your shows. Just appreciate if share it with your friends. Give us a 5-star review. Write something down. Certainly we appreciate it. Until next week, this is Rich Sierra with the Florida Small Business Legal Center. Remember that my goal is to help you succeed.